Hello everybody, and welcome back to this month's practice group for the contract administration. I just want to hand it over to Jim and Douglas, and we can get going with today's presentation on the submittal phase. So Jim and Doug, over to you.
Welcome back everyone. Hope everyone had a great holiday.
It's good to have everybody, and what we're talking about today are submittals, the submittal phase of the project, and getting what you specified. This is to make a reference back to the practice guide, chapter 5 in the practice guide that starts on page 83. And what we've tried to do is to go back through and share the information that is contained there in today's presentation. So one of the things just to touch on overall, submittals are an important part of the quality assurance process of the project in getting what we specified. Many times, and you probably know this, we stick with the design bid build format of construction, and that's what this presentation is based on. Of course, with integrated project delivery, that changes perhaps the timing of some of these items, and also changes the parties that may be involved at the table in pulling them together, but it still is an important activity in that delivery method as well. The submittals are information, they are a conveyance of information. We talk about the systems, equipment, materials, product data, and administrative kind of matters in the process of having products and or the project move forward, products incorporated into the project. And they're about how things are going to be fabricated and how they're going to be supplied. They talk about timelines, and it's a sharing of information. So, Doug, I don't know if there's anything you want to add about their tie to the contract, for example, and what how they are or how they are not contract documents.
Okay. Well, submittals are not contract documents. The contract documents require that the contractor submit submittals so that he can illustrate to the design professional how he intends to comply with the design intent shown in the documents. But those submittals do not become a part of the contract documents.
So let's start with the first phase. Again, this design bid build format. So let's take a look at the pre-construction submittals. Generally, work shouldn't happen before these items are pulled together. Even though in many occasions the parties are anxious to get the project clock running, there are important things here to be documented before any activity begins on a construction site. Certainly, for example, certificates of insurance, being sure that the required policies are in place, and these get reviewed by the architect, engineer, the designer of record, and also by the owner because they affect their property. So workman's compensation coverage at appropriate levels, and these are things that need to be looked at pre-construction. Many times they are things that carry renewal dates that need to be looked at during the life of the project. And this, I guess one thing I should touch on that we talk about frequently in this business is setting a expectation at the beginning of the job is important. It creates the format, the roadmap, if you will, of the way the parties are going to work together, and getting started in a way that you expect to finish is a grand idea. So in your process of requiring information to be complete and shared, here's where we get started. We're going to have these things in hand before you get to the site. We're going to know that the payment and performance bonds are properly executed and have been received. That there are subcontractors, if those were perhaps primary individuals that we wanted to see listed on a bid form, that we know who the subcontractors and what products are listed, so that you make that submission up front. There may be perhaps a requirement for the construction schedule to be provided. You know, this is one where you get a lot of conversation. Typically, you know, especially on jobs that are large in size, it takes a while to get the subcontractor's information, the primary subcontractor's information pulled together to be able to create a construction schedule. Some of the projects Doug and I work on require manpower loading or cost loading. So there may be an opportunity, though, to have a preliminary schedule in that process. And many times these are tied to milestones that must be passed in order to process an application for payment on the job. So the submission of some of these submittals maybe have a little more attention from the contractor than they might otherwise. A submittal schedule itself, you know, the way that our businesses operate today is so very different than it was 30 years ago. And how projects are contracted between the subcontractors and the general contractor, and how projects are bought out. We hear this all the time from the construction community that it is so very different now. So I think it makes the submittal schedule even more important and maybe even more relevant. Setting a schedule that is attainable, that's doable, that the general contractor is able to pepper out across the early phase of the job so that critical items for construction can get submitted, reviewed, and returned. And if there's agreement between the parties that this schedule is something that we're going to stick to, so that materials can move the project forward, and then allow for things perhaps to be submitted later that aren't so vitally critical to the schedule. So getting this submittal schedule in hand is also important. There's a schedule of values that we want to see, to start to see how the construction contract is broken down. Certainly we want to have information there that is followable. On my projects, I try to encourage folks that more information is better. I don't mind going through a lot of pages because it allows me greater detail and a better ability to see what's in place and to, as I'm required to do, end up in the end to certify that application for payment. So getting a schedule of values and the way that they're going to break those applications down is another one of the pre-construction submittals. There may be a requirement for the way the site's going to be used and the logistics of getting in and out, particularly if this project is on an existing property, if it's a renovation, if there's a part that the owner has that they need to maintain access to. So having a plan for how this is going to work before the work starts is important. And then if there is any kind of a certification associated with the project, then there may be sustainable project action plans that are required. And they may be involved from the very beginning through the submittal phase, through construction. So these action plans would be important to take a look at early before construction began. Doug, is there anything you can think of to embellish there?
Going back to the submittal schedule, you had shared a story, and I'm not sure if it was in this webinar or some other discussions we've had about a job where at the pre-construction conference, the contractor comes in and he's got a box of submittals waiting for you at the pre-construction conference. Jim, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit or not, but this submittal schedule is a very important item. It can be used as a tool for us in helping to plan out our work, is to know when submittals are going to come in, what staffing we need to have on board to review them when they arrive. The other thing that I have used it for, and it becomes a tool for, is to help ward off delay claims. Is if the contractor is not adhering to his submittal schedules and his submittals are late, then that in and of itself is a delay. If the submittal was supposed to be in on January 1st and the submittal doesn't get in until February 1st per his submittal schedule, he's 30 days behind on that submittal schedule. And as we may or may not be aware, a concurrent delay, where if the owner at some point during that 30 days caused a delay, or we caused a delay and responded to an RFI in 5 days when we're supposed to respond to it in 3 days, and the contractor comes back and is asking for a delay, I'll tell them, I'm sorry, you don't get a delay, it's concurrent delay, you're behind on your submittal schedule. So all these items, CSI and AIA recognize as pre-construction submittals. I'm going to, Jim, I think, break and let you, if you want to share the story about the contractor that comes in on the pre-construction conference with all his paperwork and RFI. And after you do that, I'm going to hit on these comments and questions that we've got coming in.
Okay. I'll shorten the version that I've shared before, but at the pre-construction conference, this project that Doug's referring to, general contractor came in with boxes of material, and the first box sat down, opened up, and it was a pile of submittals, all sorts of things, items that were needed early, items that weren't needed so early, but it was just a mountain of paperwork. And of course, they hadn't been reviewed. They were just in his possession, and he brought those to his office and stamped them, like sometimes occurs, and absolutely didn't go through them as he should have. Brought them to us and slapped them down on the table and said, you know, you're holding me up. I need these items, and I need them all right now. They're all critical to the schedule, and they're all critical to our delivering this project on time. And if you can't get them back to us, and guess what? You know, the specification that we were working with, we ourselves said we would return the submittals in 21 days, or some arbitrary number that someone had put into the specifications as a turnaround. Now, I'll just stop and say, if you're staffed such that you can reply to everything in the time frame that you say in your specifications, great. If you can't, take it out. Don't leave that in there. So he immediately turned the game around on us to say, okay, your clock started, you got 21 days to get all this back. And by the way, this other box is full of RFIs, because as we were going through our bidding process, you know, we were making questions that we didn't understand. Of course, he didn't share any of those prior to the bid, didn't share them prior to the contract being signed, but now all of a sudden had 35 RFIs that are in a box, and of course they all say that they need to be responded to ASAP. We got to have these immediately. We went through, and there was some inference that these RFIs also got generated out of their review of the submittals. So we started deep in a hole on the project by our own doing in some ways, and had at the beginning a scenario set up where everyone was adversarial and against one another rather than starting out on the same sheet of music. So I stress great care in putting together your specification section that addresses, and we'll talk about submittals here, RFIs another day. Doug, you go ahead.
Kevin O'Brien comments, I would suggest that the contractor's bond and evidence of insurance are not submittals, quote unquote, because they are typically not being reviewed by the architect or engineer and are obviously not being stamped with the submittal review stamp. The AE should not review insurance because his professional liability coverage does not include dispensing insurance advice. We require these documents be submitted. They come to us and we forward those on to the owner, and as I mentioned earlier, CSI and AIA does recognize those as pre-construction submittals. They're not submittals in the sense of product data or shop drawings that we typically think of when we think of submittals. And when we get them, we should look at them. We're not looking at them to dispense insurance advice. We're looking at them to see that are they in the format that we asked for them to be in? Are we listed as an additional insured? Is the owner listed as an additional insured? Do they have the limits of liability that we requested, and that kind of general thing? And then forward those on to the owner. Kevin further goes on to say, and it was something that I just mentioned, that the AE should look over the contractor's insurance certificates to ensure that the AE is listed as an additional insured in its endorsements. So when you get those documents, I would suggest that you do look them over and make sure that they are in the proper format. If you've asked for in your documents, and this information usually comes to you from the owner as to what they want for and the limits of liability and insurance coverage. If it says they want a $5 million policy and that insurance certificate comes in and it's a $2 million policy, there's no need for you to forward that on to the owner. You need to return that back to the contractor, copy the owner, tell him you're not complying with the documents. So again, our review is not to dispense insurance advice. As Kevin mentioned, it is to see that what they're submitting complies with the documents and is in the format that we call for it to be. And Mohammed's comment, and I cannot see his last name is cut off here, is I think that all these submittals are part of the commercial offer, are they not? I'm not quite sure what he means by commercial offer, and Mohammed, if you want to clarify that, please do so. They are documents, all of these that you see on the screen are documents that are required by the contract documents. None of these really are, or that some of them could or could not be actually considered contract documents. A lot of times the construction schedule will become a part of the contract documents. Some of these sustainable action plans may become a part of the contract documents depending on how you have your front end set up. But those documents are information that's, as Jim said, that we use throughout the course of the project, be it the insurance certificate. I would advise when you get those to look at them again, and Jim mentioned this, check the expiration date and put a reminder on your calendar to ask for a renewed insurance certificate if you got a project that's going to last past that expiration date. That's something that we would all be well advised to do, and it's not something that I necessarily remember doing every project, but I try to. So Mohammed, if that does not respond to your question, please feel free to clarify and send us another one. And Mitch Miller asked, are the insurance certificates considered as informational submittals with no action required? And I would say that yes, we do not stamp them approved, make corrections noted. We take them for information. I think we should look at them. If there's a problem with them, we should send them back and tell the contractor what the problem is. And they are informational submittals that we review for information only, basically. Jim?
And I guess the only time that, as you were saying, Doug, it may require action is if the if the renewal date passes, then we've got to get busy to get that coverage back in place.
Okay.
That would be after the original submittal. Then we'll move from pre-construction into the construction phase of the project, and we have a couple of different categories to look at here. We have action submittals, we've got informational submittals, and closeout submittals. So obviously in the action submittals, these are things that we need to take action on. They come to us as information that may be drawings that actually end up being used in the shop in the manufacturing process of whatever the product is. It may be product data so that we can compare what our specifications requested against what the product is currently. You know, it's just the pace at which change happens in the construction industry seems to make this more difficult every year. And the process of acquisition of one company of another also make it difficult to maintain a level playing field when so many changes occur, particularly when you're working on jobs that take some period of time from design through award to get to work. Also, there may be samples that are required and would be a part of that submittal too. All of these would come to us, be reviewed, and there would be some action that we would take in sending those back to the constructor. There's another type of submittal which is informational, which may include some delegation of design through some quality assurance or quality control kind of a submittal process where certain criteria were met. Test reports that we see during the construction are an example of this. Coordination drawings, more often than not, they are required to be done on projects to get to the level of design criteria for all things to be considered to be installed where they need to be, and field coordination is a big part of how that might occur and what's the easiest, best, safest route for items to be installed. And then there may be particular certificates that might be required for the construction process. It could be construction phase photographs, some kind of activities that we require to be documented. There may be certificates of certain types of work, welding or other inspections kind of items that might be required. Then there's also closeout submittals, where we get the operation and maintenance manuals of how to take care of our newly constructed project. There may be attic stock that's required as a part of the closing out of a job. Certainly there are warranties that would be a part of that closeout process, and then finally the as-built documents that the owner would use in their facilities maintenance and management process to look after the facility. Doug, you want to talk any? We sort of go back to each one and look at what that might be. I'll start out with the shop drawings. These are opportunities for us to take a closer look in detail than we may have had included in our project specifications or on the drawings. An opportunity to see an equal product that perhaps wasn't the basis of design, and how that may affect sight lines on our building, how that may affect some other relationship to other parts of the project and some other kind of use. And with that change in manufactured and product data that would go along with that, that may help us avoid any misunderstandings of how that, that material may work. And then samples to actually see it, to touch it, to understand precisely what it would look like, and take things to a different level of detail with color and finish. Doug, anything about action submittals you want to add?
Another item that might be an action submittal is a mock-up, whether it is on the site, in which case it's not really being submitted, or a smaller mock-up like a casework sample, section of a piece of casework or some specialty woodworking item. That also would be an action submittal where we are reviewing it and making comments, approving it. Jim, I'm sorry. I got a note here that my audio was lost. I was saying that another item that might be an action submittal is a mock-up, whether it's on site or whether it's actually a smaller physical mock-up like a piece of casework that could be delivered to your office. I kind of lost my train of thought when my sound went out.
I'll touch on that mock-up. I'll just share that an experience I had on a project where, unfortunately, the architect had specified a mock-up, but because it was the exact product, the exact model number, the exact item that was specified, they didn't enforce the requirement of that mock-up. Something went wrong on the job, and they ended up having to pay for that problem, even though it wasn't something that would, now I'll give you opinion here instead of fact, but had the mock-up been there, nothing would have been seen that would have changed the end result. But because that mock-up was specified but not required, that individual was held accountable. So again, I'll go back to say, we create these specifications. We are the authors of this. Let's put in there what we intend and get out of there what we don't need. And so when you do have samples, when you do require samples, be sure that you get them.
Let me address the comments that we got, Jim. Kevin O'Brien again is referring to the EJCDC document C700. He says that document says that the engineer is to approve delegated design submittals for selected items only. He says so his firm, because they use EJCDC documents, list delegated design submittals as action submittals, which is different than AIA documents. AIA documents has delegated design submittals as informational submittals, and most of the engineers that I've worked with, if we are asking for a delegated design item, will say in the specifications that we're entitled to rely on that design being done by an engineer that the contractor hires. We require that that engineer be licensed in the state where the work is being done, and so that we are taking it as information, not reviewing it for, even though oftentimes we look at it and make sure that the calculations are right, but we're not looking at it to take on the responsibility for that delegated design. Mohammed has a question here. What about RFC, or requests for clarifications, as informational submittals? I don't know that I've ever used the term RFC. Jim, I don't know if you have or not. I want to comment on that. If a contractor is asking a question for an interpretation of the documents, then it would be an RFI, and that's totally different. The submittals, RFIs are again requests for information or requests for interpretation from the contractor. That is not a submittal, which is again, when the contractor is submitting documentations to show how they intend to comply with the requirements of the contract documents.
That's right. It depending on the document, whether it's CSI or AIA or EJCDC, the word interpretation, I think, is what we use at CSI, and it is when there's something that is needed for clarification. I'm not familiar with the RFC, but I think that they are one and the same, and they are not, and we specifically talk about that in the practice guide. They are not items, RFIs, RFCs are not tools to use in the submittal process. They are for questions separate.
That's correct. Kevin O'Brien again is saying the various types of RFIs that we are talking about here are set forth in the CSI section format and are memorialized in greater detail in the CSI practice guide, and we've referenced the CSI practice guide several times before. That is really the basis for most of the information that we put forth in these webinars.
Right.
The EJCDC C700 has the same requirement, referring back to my comments about being able to rely on the delegated design, but the engineer is to approve whether it complies with the design input data given in the contract documents. From Mohammed, when we have to submit claims for various orders, time extensions, price breakdowns. I'm assuming that that is referring back to the RFC, request for clarifications when we have to submit claims for various orders, time extensions, price breakdowns. I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. Jim, do you have any insight as to what might be the issue there?
No, I don't. I'm just reading it too. I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure either, Doug. Hey, Muhammad could rephrase that, and we'll just touch a second while he's doing that on the closeout submittals. Obviously, at the conclusion of the process, then there's operations and maintenance manuals that need to be in the owner's hands to properly operate the facility, and more often we're seeing companies be involved throughout the construction, and the word just left my mind. It'll come to me. But they're becoming involved in the construction phase all the way through to the conclusion of construction. The O&M manuals are being built as early submittals now, a little earlier, maybe not closeout, so that they can be used to do testing and balancing as consultants are at the table to do that, and also operational engineering, the word I can't think of. And then we've got the warranties that obviously are critical for start dates, to be precise, to be sure that they're tied to those actual dates and not just sent in with a start date when the submittal was made or when the submittal was put together. And the attic stock is something that we've touched on that are also a part of what we're doing in our projects. And I would just caution you again here to think about what you're doing for your particular client. Many of the ones that we work with are not interested in attic stock. They don't have a way to handle it or a place to store it, and if it does get to the job, it typically gets utilized in the punch list phase and never replaced. And of course, we're there to oversee that doesn't happen, but too often it does. And there's money in the construction budget for that attic stock. So again, looking at your specific client, if you use it, keep it in there. If you don't, get it out. They're paying for something that many times they don't receive.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I would strongly advise that you check as you're preparing the specifications with the owners to see what, if any, attic stock they want. These spec software packages typically include attic stock, and we'll go through and because it's in there, leave it in there. But a lot of times, at least in my experience, the owner doesn't have a place to put it, doesn't want it. Some of the stuff, paint, the shelf life isn't, when you look at the quantities of paint that you're asking for, when it says 5% of each color, and you've got a few colors and you got a huge building, you're talking about a lot of paint, and the shelf life on it may not be such that it's going to be of any use to the owner. So, as Jim said, get that stuff out of there if we're not really going to use it, or if the owner doesn't want it, we don't need it. Stephen Kendrick comments that in California, delegated design work for DSA, the state architect, does require action by the design team. So for DSA projects, delegated designs fall under action submittals.
Okay. Interesting. Well, the term I've been trying to think of is commissioning agents. More and more we're seeing those be a part of the projects that we're doing, and when there are commissioning agents involved in some of these things that we're talking about, just like with integrated project delivery, move up earlier in the sequence, perhaps to be a tool in commissioning the project. Matthew, you want to go to the next slide unless we have any further questions?
There's one question, but let's come back to it. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay. So these are some. Go ahead, Doug.
This is, keep in mind, for submittals. Submittals are specially prepared by the contractor, manufacturer, supplier, distributor to demonstrate the way by which the contractor proposes to conform to the information given and the design concept expressed in the contract documents. That's language from AIA 201. Too often I see a submittal come in that is not specially prepared. It is a manufacturer standard cut sheet. It shows, for example, a window, and it shows a window frame, but shows nothing in terms of how that window frame or that window is to be installed in the wall that we designed. There's none of the adjacent construction shown. That is not telling us anything. That doesn't demonstrate how the contractor proposes to conform with the information given in the contract documents. So when you get these shop drawings, make sure that they are doing what they are intended to do, and they're showing you how the contractor is going to put everything together, and not just showing you the isolated individual pieces. We mentioned before, submittals are not contract documents. CDs, as we call them, when we put our documents together, are contract documents. They're not construction documents. The architect's documents are to show the design concept and the design intent. They are not intended to be a complete set of instructions on how to construct a building. That's a misconception that I run into a lot, contractors and owners, thinking that the set of documents that we put together is an instruction manual like you would get when you go to a model shop and you buy a model airplane or whatever it is, and there's the instruction manual in there showing you these are how you put the pieces together and the sequence to do it all. That's not what contract documents are. That's not what the documents we prepare are. They're not what they're intended to be. The contractor is supposed to be the expert in construction and how to put it together. We are responsible for the design and the design intent, the design concept. Jim, anything there? Jim? Hello?
Sorry, put myself on mute there, Doug. No, I don't have anything further to add to that one.
Yeah,
Actually,
no.
go to the
Don't
next
see any,
slide.
don't see any comments coming in on that one.
So, this is what we've been talking about. The submittal starts with the contractor. They're to be reviewing the package, the information, the product to compare it to the contract requirements, to be sure that it meets those requirements. They're looking for dimensional information. They're responsible for coordination within other products, as Doug just described, on the site, and they're also responsible for quantities, so that this information is properly ordered for inclusion in the project at the proper time. I would bet you that everyone on the call can look at these questions and have had packages come to them with these various things circled and the words written beside it by architect or by engineer.
Or architect verify.
Right, architect verify, that's right. These are the responsibilities that should be taken care of in the contractor's review.
Every time I get a shop drawing or submittal, excuse me, a submittal in and it's got a dimension circled and this is by architect or architect verify or something along those lines, I will cross out the architect and put GC in there. As Jim just said, the contractor is to review for dimensions, coordination, and quantities. That's not our responsibility when we review shop drawings. And the diagram on the right here kind of shows the flow process. The contractor, a step prior to what you're seeing here, the contractor will get the shop drawings prepared by his subcontractor or the manufacturer supplier. He is to review them for the items we just talked about. Once he's reviewed and approved them, and oftentimes we get them where the contractor doesn't even look at them, they'll just pass them through. And if I can tell that that's happened, I'll return them and make sure that the contractor reviews them before I review them. So after he reviews them and approves them, they come to the architect. It may be that it needs to go to a consultant who will review it and return it to the architect. There may be some submittals that need to go to the owner for their input. So that's kind of the workflow.
And maybe that there are some state agency, that is the same process. We have a consultant. We may have a state agency like Department of Labor or Department of Insurance that might need to take a look at a certain package. And it jumps back to the submittal schedule and how important that is at the beginning of the job, so that everyone understands that that's a piece of the time frame that needs to be accounted for.
Kevin O'Brien points out that both the AIA general conditions and the EJCDC documents require for the contractor to field verify dimensions and quantities prior to submitting the shop drawings or other submittals to the architect for his review.
I would just share with you some things that maybe aren't in the practice guide here, but I think that they're good ways to practice, and they're things that have come from participants in webinars just like this that come from you. But deciding early in the project how that review and return is going to be handled and how you're going to be on schedule, and making the commitment from the design side to meet the dates that you agree to will, I think, go a long ways to helping create a team spirit on the project. Doug and I talk a lot about team spirit and everybody pulling in the same direction and keeping a momentum going once it starts. And then keeping one another on task at that, so that if you do get these submittals through the contractor that haven't been coordinated or reviewed, you turn them back around. Take them to them and hand them to them on the job site in person. make that communication, very, very factual and reasonable, and point out that, they're not holding up their end of the bargain, but you got to be willing to do that same thing. And I think another thing that has worked is perhaps doing some of this review that we do together. So, that at the job site, I've often sat with the sub-consultant to the subcontractor to the contractor, and I've learned a great deal in taking that time to do that. Now, I don't just stamp them and hand them back right there, but being on the job, in the field, with the installer, I think sometimes can be helpful for them to understand, if they don't already, what our intent was.
Jim, I would agree, and Matthew, you can go to the next slide. I have oftentimes sat with the contractor or the sub or subcontractor, and not necessarily, as Jim said, reviewed and stamped the drawings right there, but they would bring a draft of their shop drawings. We'd go through them. They'd ask questions, get their questions answered, so that when they did submit them, then it wasn't a lot of back and forth with them sending us something, we marking it up, sending it back, and then they got to revise it and send it back to us, and they miss something else and we send it back. So taking that time can shorten that submittal process and the time it takes to review submittals. And again, as Jim said, it's a part of that teaming that can value a lot and go a long way.
Right.
So we talked about what the contractor's review is for. This slide talks about what the architect's review is for. And you can see the language there per the AIA general conditions. It's the limited purpose of checking for conformance with the information given in the design concept expressed in the contract documents. So we are looking for design intent. We are not reviewing them to determine the accuracy and completeness of other details such as dimensions and quantities, all of which remains the responsibility of the contractor. Contractors should not be relieved of responsibilities for deviations from the requirements of the contract documents by the architect's approval of shop drawings, product data, samples, or similar submittals. Again, shop drawings are not contract documents. If something has been changed or deviates from the requirements of the contract documents in those shop drawings and we approve them, the contractor is still responsible for complying with what was in those contract documents, not what was in the shop drawings. And a lot of contractors want to argue, well, you approved the shop drawings, and I say, yeah, I did approve them, but the shop drawings don't change the contract requirements. You're still obligated to do what was in the contract. I may have missed catching the error in the shop drawings, but I didn't create the error in the shop drawings. Your sub or your supplier did, and you did by not catching it in your review. I'm not responsible for their error. I may have missed their error, but I didn't create it. I'm not responsible for their error. So our review should be timely, it should be thorough, and it should be done by qualified persons. Make sure we got somebody that knows what they're doing looking at the shop drawings. And submittals. And incomplete submittals should be returned without action. If you get a submittal and stuff is missing, return it, and return it quickly. If you get a submittal and it's not one of the approved products, return it quickly. Don't let it sit on your desk for, if you got 21 days, let it sit on your desk for 14 days and then return it 2 weeks after you got it, saying you got to revise and resubmit it because the manufacturer's not one that's in the specs. We should do these reviews quickly to help expedite the construction process. I'm sorry, Jim. One other thing I would mention regarding submittals is the documents also allow us to hold a submittal if its review is dependent or contingent upon another submittal. So remember that too. A lot of times you got interface between curtain wall and masonry, or curtain wall and metal panel, and you need to see how the two are going together. And you got the metal panels guy stuff, but you don't have the curtain wall guy stuff, and you don't know how the two are going to come together. I've seen submittals where the curtain guys got one detail and metal panels got a different detail, and it's the same condition where the two items are supposed to come together. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on one thing there, Doug, and then I want to get to this question because I love it. Not required submittals. You know, frequently you hear, well, I forwarded this to you because I got it from my sub, and they're not going to order the material until they get this back. Well, we appreciate that, but that's not our issue to resolve. If it's not a required submittal, there is nothing. There's no reason that we should be taking action on that submittal. And in fact, if we do, then you know, we're starting a process that might be hard to back out of once it's over. So, as Doug said, if it's not required, ship it back to them. Their process of getting materials to the job and ordered and in place is not a part of our responsibility through the submittal phase. There's a statement here from Sherry or Charisse about how MEP engineers often get pushback from the architects at returning a incomplete submittal or something that was piecemeal. The architects often want those submittals to move on through. And I think you're absolutely right that I'm an architect, so I'm going to talk bad about us. We do that. And more often than not, it may be for the wrong reason. We may have delayed getting the project underway because of something that we felt was important. We're behind the eight ball. We may have a client who already is a little unhappy because we haven't gotten started when we thought we would. There may be extenuating circumstances of, I guess what I'm trying to say is we end up personalizing parts of projects and decisions that we make on projects, and making those decisions that way often turns out to be a bad idea. If it's good that the return a submittal that's incomplete, it's good for all the design team. And what we're talking about is getting that submittal back as quickly as possible so that it can be resubmitted. Particularly with MEP, I see that it comes in as a very large package, and there are pieces and parts that may have been missed in the process because of the voluminous information. I find that there may be small things here and there that could be submitted without returning the whole thing, but that's not following the process we're talking about. We talk about sending it back if it's not complete, and I think perhaps in your case with your architects, maybe you sit down with them and help educate them on a way that they can potentially operate in a more profitable method. Show them what you're talking about here, and they may come around to your way of thinking.
Two issues with incomplete submittals. One is the piece that's missing could have a big impact on the piece that you're trying to look at, and what you're looking at may look like, yeah, this is going to work, it's acceptable, and then you get the rest of it and wait a minute, this doesn't work. And so something that you've returned that says, yeah, this looks okay, then you find out later on, no, it's not okay. That's a big problem with looking at these things piecemeal. I forgot what my second point was going to be, but we're getting close to time, so let's keep going.
Okay. Matthew, next slide.
Upcoming events, CSI Academies in February, and our next meeting is February 26th. While you're looking at that information, I'm going to go back and touch on a couple of comments or questions that came through. Hopefully we can wrap this up in about 2 minutes. Kevin notes that if the documents are not clear on design intent, that we cannot enforce a design intent through the submittal process, and I would agree with that. I didn't say it quite the way Kevin had written it here, but the point is, shop drawings are not a means for completing your design. They are not a means for making changes to your design, and they should not be used as such. Mitch Miller has a question: how many times do we review a submittal, incomplete or inaccurate submittals? Good question. You may, and I've seen this done before, put in your specifications that you're going to review submittals twice, and you also may have it in your agreement with the owner. You're going to review submittals twice, and anything after that is above and beyond or additional services. So if you get something once and you reject it because it's incomplete, and then it comes back again and it doesn't comply with the documents, you send it back the second time. If you've got it in your documents the third time through, you can request additional services for it. I have had several instances where the contractors just don't want to get on board and keep sending piecemeal stuff and all, and at points like that you just kind of have to sit down and talk to them, and sometimes even get the owner involved to get them to get on board and get these things through. Eventually it'll impact them, because if they're sending stuff through and you got to keep returning it, it's going to eventually impact their schedule, and them not complying with the documents and getting the submittals in the proper format is not an excuse or a reason for a delay. Mitch again says sometimes contractors will continue to submit the same items over and over, hoping to wear you down. Yeah, and you just need to stick to your guns. So before we close out, I skipped over a question that is I'm going to go back to. Is maybe a topic for another seminar. This came from Mitchell when we were having one of the other slides up showing the different types of submittals, and we were talking about closeout submittals. His question is, and we'll put this to the group, and if anybody wants to respond, we would welcome it, and we can talk about it the next time we get together, or again maybe have a whole another seminar on this. This is: how can we control the timely closeout beyond substantial completion? We see contractors dragging their feet and thus dragging out the closeout of a project, which affects the professional's fee. I know we can hold money, but substantial completion triggers many actions, including reduction of retainage. Probably nobody on this call has ever had a contractor drag their feet during the closeout process. I'm being facetious. I'm sure we all have. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. Again, if anybody on the call wants to respond, please feel free to do so. And Jim, this might be something we might take up in the future, talking about closing out a project.
I think it's a great idea. I think that's a great idea for a full hour, and perhaps if everyone would send their ideas, we could develop some information around those ideas. That's a great subject.
Let me say, and I know we dropped a couple of people, let me say one last thing before we go on reviewing shop drawings and submittals. As we said before, we're not responsible for dimensions and quantities. My advice to you is, when you get a shop drawing in and you see that there is a dimension on there that is not consistent with the dimensions you have in your drawings, is not to cross that dimension off and change it to what you had on your documents. You do not know at that point, unless you've had a conversation with the contractor, why he has made that change in that dimension. It could be because of erection tolerances, construction tolerances, using a different product than the one that was the basis of your design, or any other number of reasons. And when you go in and you change that dimension, you are taking responsibility for it. What I would suggest you do is circle it, put a question mark by it, and note, this varies from the contract documents. Contracts say it should be 3 feet. You got it at 2 feet 8 inches. What's going on? So that you don't take on ownership and responsibility for something that you contractually are not obligated for. So just wanted to throw that out before we got off the call. Jim?
Fantastic. I appreciate everybody being here. Matthew, is there anything you want to talk about to wrap us up?
No, great conversation from everybody today. Thank you again. And we hope to see you next month for a continuing conversation on contract administration. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.